something in the thumbs up if you can hear me. Hello. Okay. All right. So firstly, I have to apologize from where I am. We're battling with a little bit of power outages in South Africa. So I'm way up in a very remote part training the crews. My name is Graeme Harding. I am the National Training Manager for Sea Rescue South Africa. And Caroline asked me to go through a couple of our sort of incidents that have happened over the years, and then we can maybe have a little bit of discussion and afterwards, and a couple of questions. Obviously, a lot of the stuff that has been covered by the previous speakers is stuff that we discovered after these kind of incidents that we had. So let's get going. So the first one I'd like to discuss is the Ickletal plane crash disaster. So in all of our years of training, we always try and set the scenario if a plane does go into the ocean, that we're going to be picking up casualties. We're going to be picking up people out of the water and saving some lives. And as you will see with this one, that is not necessarily exactly what happens. So we had a pilot, co-pilot, and 7 passengers flying from a place in South Africa called Queenstown to Plettenberg Bay in a light drizzle, but a very thick fog. They disappeared off the radar at about 1633, but no distress had been received. So all of the local sea rescue stations in the area were put on standby while there was an investigation that happened. As I say, the weather was not very good at that time of the year. We get very, very thick fog. So the initial thoughts was that the aircraft had diverted to another airport with a safer landing. The airport they were on their way to didn't have any instrumentation landing, so obviously we thought, well, they're going somewhere safer. At 2400 that evening, we were asked to launch at first light the next morning and to sort of start searching between one of the bases in Knysna to a base up in Plettenberg Bay. Often I think everybody out there in the sea rescue world that we all work in, often we get calls, or we call them calls, you call them shots. We get shots of such a nature which end up in a stand down due to casualties being safely located. So you don't pay much attention what crew members you're putting out, sending out on these kind of calls. And this in hindsight, I was a station commander of the station at that stage, and it was a very big mistake that I made. Because the assumption was, it's just one of the, we're going off to just another one of the sort of mundane rescues, and it's going to be called off, and there's no ways the aircraft would have crashed into the ocean, and we're all going to go home, wash the boats, and carry on with our day's work. As I say, a big, big, big mistake. So a couple of pictures, and excuse me if they are a little bit gory, but what actually happened is the aircraft did hit the water with 9 people in it, and we picked up many, many pieces of people as the engine was pushed straight through the aircraft, and it was just not a very pretty sight. So 1 or 2 pictures just of the actual day with the different boats that we were out there on. And as I said, details of what we discovered that day are not for the faint-hearted. I have been doing this job for 35 years, and I can still emphatically say it's the worst situation I've ever faced. And I really hope myself and other crew around the world never, ever have to witness anything like this again. I know there are organizations around the world, the SOS Mediterranean that have a lot of trauma in that. And obviously they have big cases, but something as traumatic as this is just something that we shouldn't have to deal with as human beings. And that as I say, I really pray that nobody else has to go through these kind of situations. So at the time of the incident, I had 23 years service, and I was the station commander of the local station. The thing that we look at in a voluntary kind of sense is that a lot of our crew had less than 5 years service. They hadn't really been exposed to much in the line of serious trauma. And the 2 flanking stations, Knysna and Plettenberg Bay in South Africa, we basically ended up picking up all 9 bodies, which were in many, many pieces. Some even not as recognizable as human beings. It was something that, nobody really prepares you for. And part of why I go into such depth here is again, I look at the training side of things. We need to really have a look and we need to understand. It's all good and well to ask questions like earlier saying, are we setting the right scenarios? Should crew be questioning things while we're out there? I will tell you this day, it was so traumatic, and there could be no questions on the leadership of who was instructing who to do what. But I don't think on the crew side there was any time for that either. So my big problem with this is what all the training we had previously was always, as I said, we were always trained, and you're going to go pick up survivors, and, you know, it might be a couple are dead, but you're going to get survivors. And, you know, in these kind of cases, there weren't any. And it just sort of pushed some buttons to say, when we do this kind of training, should we be training our crews and preparing them for this eventuality? So, apart from some in-house debriefings on station, nothing much was being done about trauma-related stress back then. Upon a request from both of the stations, we asked for outside counseling, which I think was very good, because, as a couple of speakers have mentioned, you know, in-house are the guys, they don't want to speak, they don't want to be seen as weak. There's the other kind of situation that we look at is, remember, a lot of what we do is good fun. You know, we go out there on boats in the sea, playing with boats and training and learning new skills. And there's a lot of fun. And then you go out and you have a really miraculous rescue, and you save a whole lot of lives, and it gives you this real big high. So sometimes after a situation like this, a crewman doesn't want to mention the problem that they are having issues or problems, because they fear that they might now be taken out of the system and lose out on all those good things. It was really, after this incident, we had some really serious effects on some of our crews. It was really, really bad. And there was a big lesson in the fact that our leaders needed some training. And I think maybe Frederick touched on this, and one of the previous speakers is I think that's one of the biggest problems internationally about, a lot of the rescue organizations or voluntary organizations that are still sort of run sort of by the older generations. It's generational that takes it through. And I think the older generations were just trained to just, well, toughen up, get on with it, let's go, and next rescue is going to happen, and, you know, deal with it and move on. And as one of those sort of guys that's been around for 35 years, I think that the biggest thing for me was to teach myself to understand the requirements of crews, and to understand the possible problems that crews are having, and to understand that, you know, I'm having my own problems, and to be vulnerable. I think as a leader that can show his crew vulnerability to a situation makes it incredibly easy for your crew to come and speak to you. If you're that big, tough leader that sort of shows everybody that nothing affects you and nothing harms you and you can do anything and let's get on with it, I think it will close a lot of doors and will make a lot of people a lot more worried and not easily able to talk to you. Counseling obviously was of huge benefit to our crews. You know, one mistake was done by both the Plet station commander and myself, being the tough old school crew. We didn't have any outside help. We just tried to work through the situation internally, which years after the incident, I understand with myself personally, it was a big mistake. You know, very sadly, the Plettenberg Bay Station commander, who had been valiantly fighting leukemia for years and years and years, also did not seek help. But he did confess to me a while afterwards that it was really a big mistake. And it wasn't too long afterwards that he just said he just couldn't anymore. And he passed on due to leukemia. And a lot of us strongly believe that, you know, the destruction and devastation that we witnessed that day was part of you know, Uncle Ray basically sort of just giving up the fight. So, yeah, it was something that we looked at and said, leadership and old crew that are these big, tough guys, you know, they need to actually understand. They need to show vulnerability. They need to be able to let the youth of today come through and start asking questions and start being afraid not to talk. And I'm not talking about actually in the rescue. I'm talking about after the rescue. And I'm talking about after rescues they haven't been on, maybe them opening up for questions of stuff, drowning, children drowning, so on and so forth, so that we can have a two-way open communication with nobody being really scared or shy to discuss any kind of traumatic issues that they have. So, you know, sadly, after this event, we lost some crew, and not by life. You know, they just couldn't face such trauma, and many had long periods of counseling to deal with what was witnessed. You know, so some of the crew just said, you know, they couldn't do this, they couldn't witness this, so they moved on and, you know, went to animal welfare and some of the other organizations where there wasn't any possibility of this trauma. But there was also a positive side, because after this, it did sort of kickstart us into putting some real hard work and effort into preparing our crews for better dealing with such situations. So, you know, that was the first one. And, you know, very sadly, 2 months later, we had a school bus that went into a flooded river. the original call was saying that the bus had gone into the river and there was 2 children and the bus driver trapped in the bus. And we had to go and obviously, as the only people that really work in the water around that area, we were asked to go and get the 2 children and the bus driver out. And this is where lessons from the first incident already started paying dividends, because what happened is on this one, as soon as I heard there were the 2 children on board, I excluded any of our crew that had young children of their own. Because for me, that's sort of a sign. I think through my years, I have noticed with children drowning, any crew that have got children of that kind of similar age, it really does affect them. So I chose to not let any of the crew that had children go on that call, on the shot. They were very upset during the actual shot, but I didn't change my decision. And years afterwards, they actually all did come back and thank me for not allowing them to go on the call, because they said it would have severely affected them. Because the 2 children, it turned out actually to be 14 school children in the bus that day. Well, there were more, but the bigger school children got out. That was the back of the bus was sticking out, so they managed to get out. And all the young kids with their little school bags on their back were still stuck in the bus. And like I say, there was a total of 14 school children that we pulled out of the water that day, and the bus driver. It was literally, the school bus was 15 minutes away from where they'd picked all the children up. So, being that bad news travels very fast, we had all of the parents and the families standing next to the river on the road. And I think that was a big thing for us to also focus on. It's not always just the dead people, the bodies, and that our crew have to deal with. For me, the hardest thing that day was the absolute devastation of the parents, the sadness of the parents, the breaking down, and the absolute trauma that was going on with those parents was so hard for us to handle that day while we were working, pulling the children out of the bus. Not very, very pleasant. So, both cases we dealt with close families. In the case of the bus, as I said, the parents were very close. In the case of the aircraft, it was owned by a company that sort of a lot of the directors retired in the area where our sea rescue base was. So they were on the mobile phones phoning us to find out about their people. And, here we were dealing with picking them up, and we were trying to also not say anything to the people on the phone because it's not the right thing, but knowing the devastation that was going to hit those families as time moved on. So again, a graphic picture, and why I do these every now and again is, so this is some of the young kids that we picked up and got out there. I don't think any human, especially in the voluntary world that grows up, sort of witnesses things like this and has to be put through things like this. And we now look at saying none of the crew were trained for this before this. We were a sea rescue crew that went out and did our things. And again, as Frederick said, you never really know what you're dealing with. So how can you really train for every scenario 100%? You can't. You can't train for every single kind of death that's going to happen out there. You can't train for weather. You can train for bad weather, but not at that exact moment when you're actually having the rescue. So again, how do you train people to do this, to wrap bodies up in body bags and protect the bodies so that the crowds can't see them and then load them up? There is no real physical good training that you can do, apart from learning the signs of your crew and then trying to protect it. And at this point, again, it's one of the things that I think the speaker before Frederick was actually saying is one of the things we've really tried to incorporate in South Africa is learning the crew's backstories. If you learn a person's backstory, pretty much, again, like Frederick was saying, is, I was very fortunate to be on a conference with Frederick a while ago in Sweden. And, he told us back then in one of his talks about his children and about the day-to-day battles he has with his children. So automatically, and I know for me, it changed my perception of Frederick immediately, because, if he came there and he was a little bit distant in the morning, and I'm not saying you were, Frederick, but I mean, if he was, I could understand. Maybe he'd had a hard time that morning with his kids trying to get them to school, and if there is no school and all of that kind of stuff. But back in a sea rescue station environment, we try and learn our crew's backstories. have they had any trauma in their past? Have they had a member of their family joining? A lot of our crews join because they've had a trauma in their family and they want to make a difference for other people now. So, do they have children, that are that have issues? Do they have bipolar children? Do they have, there's a whole lot of ranges. And if you learn to understand the backstories of your crews, you can then understand when you go on certain shots, how it's going to affect different people differently. Because I think that's the major thing, even like the aircraft situation. The aircraft situation affected some of the crew very badly, some of the crew not so badly, and some of the crew were sort of like, okay, it was just another shot and we get on with life. So understanding that backstory, showing vulnerability as a leader, showing that you can understand and you can have this yourself. And I think any leader that's out there that says he doesn't get affected by this is not a very good leader in my eyes, and that is only my opinion. Because I don't think anybody in life can go through these things anywhere and not be affected. And you don't have to be a big tough guy. You can get on and basically you can let the crew know, pretty much after the school bus incident, I did the first debriefing, which is obviously very important, the debriefings. And I stood in front of the crew with tears in my eyes, because who wants to see so many children in a situation like that? Who wants to see so many families lose their children like that, from one community? Because it was one community that the bus arrived to pick up the children for school, and that community lost those children on that day. And I think the fact that I was very, very vulnerable to being upset and to being, to feeling sort of stressed and feeling very emotional about it. I think my crew then opened up, and it very quickly became something that was very openly discussed. And from the second incident, we actually moved on a whole lot faster than we moved on from the aircraft collision, the aircraft crash. So what we did basically, after those things, is we also started up an intensive program for our crews to help them deal with this, as well as due to the modern day stresses that all people deal with every day. It's a lot worse than, we joined 35 years ago. Now, as we've had COVID and there's financial crisis and there's all sorts of things. Life has become more expensive. People are battling, to pay for things. So there's all these extra day-to-day issues in general life that affect the well-being of our crews. And that for us is something that we really look at, and we have to look after our crews. So in our wellness program, what we've done is, not only is it the crew that can call in to an anonymous line, which is sort of handled by a life company outside of Sea Rescue. It's open to their families. So, if their spouse, husband, wife, or anything is noticing there's problems or is having issues of their own because of what the spouse has witnessed, and or if the children in the family are having any kind of emotional issues. Youngsters growing up is not the easiest, and sometimes their parents are so busy with the Sea Rescue thing and doing their own thing that the children don't really have an avenue to vent their frustrations or people to speak to. So we've opened that to our crew's children. So if they're having problems at school, they're having bullying issues, if they're having anything, that they have this available to them. And what we're hoping is that they make use, and it is being very well used. We're hoping that the families start making use of it, so that it will take the pressure off the crew person, off the volunteer who's going out there doing this thing, because they are not fighting those battles as well. And then a previous speaker as well, we look at the finances of today, and it's a very difficult world to live in. So we offer financial help to all of our crew, and not as in giving them money, but advice on investments, on when you want to purchase a house, how to do it correctly, drawing up our crew's wills, all of that. So just to take those day-to-day issues out of their hands, and so that the added stress we're putting on them with what we do at Rescue is not actually throwing them a curveball, which is one of the big problems when guys actually suffer breakdowns and those kind of things. So, I always put this in my slides to say my name is Graeme Harding. I suffer from functional brain disorder, and we changed it in South Africa from PTSD to functional brain disorder, because it is an illness. And we found with a lot of the old school crews, as soon as you told them they had PTSD, they all got these big, tough, macho kind of things. And no, there's no ways. I don't suffer from this. It doesn't affect me. And the bottom line is that we all suffer from it, and I don't care what has happened. I mean, I see our CEO's just put a message on there, who's been dealing in this kind of environment for many, many years. But I think everybody is affected. So we all need to say that let's get out there. Let's make a plan that we look after our crews. Let's get to the people that say it doesn't affect them and make it understand that, yes, it does affect them. And in saying that, again, I say I suffer from this. It's stuff that people should see. But I talk about it and I share it with others to ensure that they don't suffer from the same. And that's my medicine. And I think we can get that message out to the crews out there, that if you share it and if you help other people from suffering what you're suffering in the feelings from trauma and anything like that, it's a medicine for yourself, number one. And, it's not about saving it's not about saving the guys on sinking boats, and it's not about pulling people off of burning ships, and it's not about that we do on a day-to-day basis around the world. It's about keeping our own crew safe, looking after the physical and the mental safety of our own crew, ensuring that they lead positive lives and that this doesn't affect them too much. So in ending, I did make some notes as well. I just want to go to my note quickly. All right, to say we need to offer lifelines not only to the people that we rescue, but we need to offer lifelines to our volunteers, because I think around the world, all the rescue services rely on volunteers. And if we don't have volunteers, we can't go out there and do anything. So if there's any questions, I think, Caroline, you said 12:15, you want it to be done. So if there's any other questions or anybody like to ask something, I'm going to stand by for you.
Graeme, I don't think anyone has any questions, but I have one for you. Quickly.
Okay, I'm ready. Yeah.
I thought your presentation was really, really interesting. But just if you were an organisation that was looking to implement a wellbeing and mental health program from scratch, what would be your biggest tip to them from all that you've learned? What do you think is the most important thing to do?
Caroline, thanks for that question. Yes, I think, through the years of all the things is we tried to handle it internally originally. And I don't think the internal understanding is of the correct kind of, you don't have the correct knowledge base. So, I'm not a psychologist, and most of the guys, the senior guys out there are not psychologists. They're not trained for this. You're not prepared for it yourself. You're dealing with your own kind of stresses and your own kind of issues from these situations. So can you give the best advice? So if you look at it, what we did in South Africa and Doc Cleve, what he got is, as I say, he got an outside company. That it's not about the boats. It's not about being a coxswain or being the leader on the boat, or it's actually about the trauma. And it's about how the people are experiencing the trauma and how they're reacting to the trauma. And therefore, we find that outside organizations that are trained to do this on a day-to-day basis, whether you're an ambulance service that they're offering it to or anybody else, the outside organizations have really stepped up the game for us. So I would immediately say to everybody, look at somebody outside that you can get your crews to be able to talk to and relate to.
Perfect. So it's all about partnership working and identifying in your sphere or your locality or other organizations that might be leaders in mental health and well-being and getting them to work with you.
Yes, 100%. That's it. So, I mean, as I say, a station commander that's asked a question by his crew, he also, a lot of them, they don't want to show vulnerability, like I'm saying, and therefore their answers are not going to be what's going to help that crew person. It's going to be something like, okay, let's just get over it, or yes, we understand, we hear you, and move on. So yeah, it's definitely outside.
Okay, and
Fred.
Yeah, perfect. You noticed it. I'll let you go.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, Frederick, many years I worked under, obviously coming up through the ranks, I worked under numerous leaders. And yes, we have had leaders that sort of, after a very traumatic experience, we were sort of told to just come and sit around and have a beer and let's talk about it and go home. And it does affect crew, and it does affect pretty much what was spoken about earlier. And I think was spoken in one of your earlier slides about saying this, the silence. So you get the crews that don't want to talk about it. Because their leadership isn't of the leadership that understands this emotional stress that they're going through. And again, it goes back to the fact that they want to be part of a rescue organization. You know, all of us want to go out to save lives. That's what it's all about. You have a successful rescue and you bring 5 people home, you know, and you manage some CPR and you bring somebody back, and that's what it's all about. And we feed off that, but it doesn't always work like that. So yeah, to answer your question, the leadership, if it's not open to actually understanding and being vulnerable and showing your vulnerability, it does have a huge effect on crews. So something needs to be done with that kind of leadership. And I think it's education. I'm not saying the guys are bad leaders, but I think in the old days we were taught just to toughen up and move along. And I think even the guys, it took me a long time to learn that I had to do that. I couldn't be this tough guy just telling everybody, just move along and get on with it. We had to become vulnerable, and you know, it's something that we worked hard on, and I think it's something that can be looked around for all organizations around the world. That's it, Caroline. Sorry, I see Ruth also asked the question. Dealing with a family is difficult. Should we keep them away from the rescue team? So, Ruth, yes, you know, we do try and do that, but in some situations, as with the bus, there's no ways we could keep them away from the scene. And then the trick is to actually train people to be able to handle them. Because, you know, when you're in the water doing the actual rescue and then trying to deal with the families, it becomes very difficult. So what actually happened is we started also with some of our stations. We had specialists that would arrive at certain scenes and would take the family members away. Again, our CEO implemented, we have a press liaison officer, and his job basically during a big rescue or something is to liaise with the families and to keep the families, you know, sort of in the loop and to look after the well-being of the families. Because again, this is a great point, because it's not just the well-being of the crews, it's the well-being of those families going ahead. And a lot of what happens on a rescue and the way the families are handled is actually what makes the difference of it being a little bit easier for the families or making it more difficult. And then Mark, would you say that outside support organizations need to have a specific knowledge, experience of SAR teams or similar, as the risks are vulnerable to? So no, Mark, that was one of the things that I actually that I liked about the outside company. You know, we had some of the ladies from the team come and basically sit and talk to myself as the training manager, to our operations director, and a couple of the guys at head office. But they very quickly said to us they didn't want to get into depth of what it is about being a coxswain or being a crewman, or whether you have to know how to work radar or any knowledge of search and rescue stuff. They wanted to be an unbiased, clean sort of auditor, if I can put it that way. So when somebody presents a problem, it's not about the sea state or how the coxswain handled the boat or anything like that. It's purely about what's the trauma. It's purely about that experience that they've had that's really affecting them. And therefore, I don't think it's really important that they have a full knowledge of what our teams do. Because, as I say, ambulance drivers come across horrendous accidents. You know, we have the mountain rescue guys that come across horrendous accidents. So for us, it's not how the people got there. It's how we've handling the aftermath. And that's the big thing. I think, you know, we've been reactive all the years. In South Africa, we reacted to after something happened. And now what we're trying to do is step in there and react before things happen. And then also have these outside organizations so that when things do happen, our crews feel that they're talking to not the station commander. It's not going to victimize them. It's not going to hold them back. It's not going to do anything because they're completely outside. And the fact that they don't know search and rescue is actually sometimes a bit of a plus. I hope that answers your question.
Perfect. Graeme, I think that's all the questions.
I don't know if you noticed, Caroline, but about 15 minutes ago, a lion walked past behind you. But if you guys weren't sharp, you wouldn't have seen it.
A lion? Oh, crumbs. No, I didn't.
Yeah.
So you really were delivering this presentation in a stressful situation.
That's it. It's all good. Thank you.
Thank you. And I would just like to say thank you to Graeme, but thank you to all our speakers this morning for sharing their expertise, both organisationally and personally. It's been incredibly interesting. We're carrying on the journey. There's a SAR UK workshop at WMRC. And so I look forward to those of you that are joining us there and tuning in. And then we're going to have a later workshop in the year on SAR UK. And we're also going to, as I said earlier, we're going to have a workshop, an in-person workshop at our regional meeting later in the year at RF. If you've got any questions about the SAR UK, please email me. I'll put my email in the chat box. And we've got lots of resources on our website, not only about mental health and wellbeing, but about mass rescue operations, basic rescue boat operator manual. Thank you for joining us today. I hope that you've learned information that you can implement in your own organisations or personally. And yeah, I look forward to seeing those of you that are joining us at WMRC. Thank you and goodbye.